Hello and welcome to Late Night Stories. Meditation had always seemed like a distant concept to Ethan Reynolds. A man in his early 50s, he had built a successful career in corporate law, mastering the art of debate, negotiation, and relentless perseverance. But in the process, he had lost something: peace. His mind was a battlefield, constantly bombarded with deadlines, arguments, and responsibilities. It wasn't until his doctor, after diagnosing him with high blood pressure and chronic stress, recommended meditation that Ethan even considered slowing down. Skeptical but desperate, he signed up for a week-long retreat in the mountains of Colorado, not realizing it would change his life forever. Drive up to the retreat center was long and winding, the Rocky Mountains looming in the distance like ancient guardians. Ethan had spent most of the trip doubting his decision. Was this really necessary? He could have just taken a vacation somewhere tropical, enjoyed a few cocktails by the beach. But the doctor's words echoed in his mind. You need more than relaxation. You need to learn how to let go. Upon arrival, Ethan was greeted by the retreat leader, a woman named Mara, who radiated a calm presence. She was in her late 60s, with silver-streaked hair tied back in a simple braid, and eyes that held the kind of wisdom that came from deep inner peace. "Welcome, Ethan," she said softly. "Are you ready to begin?" He wasn't, but he nodded anyway. The retreat was strict: no cell phones, no laptops, no distractions. The first day was structured around guided meditation sessions, mindful walks, and silent meals. Silence. That was the hardest part. Ethan wasn't used to quiet. The absence of conversation felt unnatural, like an empty courtroom where no arguments were being made. But as the hours passed, he began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way the wind rustled through the pine trees, the rhythmic chirping of crickets at dusk, the subtle scent of lavender in the air. The first meditation session was a struggle. They sat cross-legged in a circle, eyes closed, breathing in unison. The instructor, a young man named Daniel, guided them gently. "Focus on your breath," he said. "Let thoughts come and go without judgment." Ethan tried. He really did. But his mind had other plans. He thought about work, about unfinished cases, about the email he had forgotten to send before leaving, about the time he had argued with his wife over something trivial. Every few minutes he cracked open an eye to see if anyone else was struggling, but they all looked so serene, so still. He sighed in frustration. He sighed. "Having trouble?" Mara's voice was gentle as they walked along the retreat's garden after the session. Ethan exhaled sharply. "I don't get it. My mind won't shut up." As the days passed, he found himself resisting meditation less and embracing it more. The mindfulness walks became his favorite part of the day. He noticed how each step connected him to the earth, how the sun cast shifting patterns through the leaves, how the scent of pine felt almost intoxicating in its freshness. He was seeing the world differently, not through the lens of stress and deadlines, but through presence. On the final day of the retreat, Mara led them in a closing meditation by a serene lake. The water was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. "Close your eyes," she instructed. "Imagine your thoughts as ripples on the water. Each breath smooths the surface, bringing clarity." Ethan inhaled deeply, visualizing the ripples settling. And then something remarkable happened. In that moment, he let go. The weight of years of pressure, expectations, and constant striving, he released it. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, and for the first time in decades, he felt light. When he opened his eyes, Mara was watching him. She nodded, as if she knew exactly what had just happened. "The silence within you is your greatest teacher," she said. "Carry it with you." Ethan left the retreat changed, not in a dramatic, earth-shattering way, but in the kind of way that mattered most. Internally. He returned to his life, to his job, to his responsibilities. But things were different. He no longer rushed through his mornings. He took his time sipping his coffee, feeling the warmth of the cup in his hands. He listened, really listened, when people spoke, instead of thinking about his next response. And when stress crept up, as it inevitably did, he returned to his breath, to the stillness he had discovered in the mountains. A few weeks later, he sat in his office, staring at his computer screen, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of work awaiting him. But instead of spiraling into stress, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and took a slow, deep breath. The noise in his mind settled. The lake became still once more. Meditation hadn't solved all his problems, but it had given him the space to navigate them with clarity. And that, he realized, was more valuable than anything he had ever learned in a courtroom. Ethan Reynolds never became a meditation guru. He didn't move to the mountains or abandon his career, but he carried the silence within him wherever he went. And in a world that never stops moving, that was the greatest success of all. Caroline Whitmore had always prided herself on being in control. A high-powered attorney in New York City, she thrived on the chaos of her job, the constant battle of courtrooms and negotiations. She wore stress like a badge of honor, until it wore her down instead. When her doctor warned her about skyrocketing blood pressure and suggested meditation, she laughed. "I don't have time to sit still." But when panic attacks started creeping in, she knew something had to change. She downloaded a meditation app and set a goal, 5 minutes a day. The first attempt was a disaster. Sitting in silence felt unbearable. Her thoughts were a relentless flood. Case files, client meetings, overdue emails. She lasted 2 minutes before checking her phone. The next day, she tried again. 5 minutes turned into 3. By day 5, she noticed something new. She could actually hear the silence. It wasn't emptiness, it was space. A break from the relentless noise of her mind. Determined, she signed up for a weekend meditation workshop in the Hudson Valley. She was skeptical but intrigued. The setting was peaceful. Rolling hills, a quiet lake, a sky unpolluted by city lights. But the real challenge was letting go. During the first session, the instructor, a soft-spoken woman named Eleanor, guided them to focus on sound. "Listen to what is here," she said. "Not what your mind creates, what exists in this moment." Caroline listened. At first, she heard nothing. Then, slowly, the world revealed itself. The rustling leaves, distant laughter, the rhythmic lapping of water against the shore. By the final day, something had shifted. As she sat by the lake, eyes closed, she felt something she hadn't in years: peace. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't life-altering, but it was real. Back in the city, she didn't abandon her career. She didn't move to a cabin in the woods. But she took 5 minutes every morning to listen to the world, to herself, to the stillness. And somehow, that small act made all the difference. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to life, she was present in it. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as James settled into his spot on the porch of his rented cabin. It was the first real break he had taken in years. The city had worn him down. Constant meetings, emails, the unrelenting buzz of notifications. His mind had become a storm, thoughts swirling without rest. He had come here, to the stillness of the mountains, in hopes of finding clarity. He took a slow sip of chamomile tea, watching the sky shift from golden hues to deep purple as dusk settled. Tonight, he would try meditation for the first time in his life. He had downloaded a guided meditation app at the recommendation of a colleague, a man who had once been just as frantic and overwhelmed as he was. James never thought much of meditation before, He had always assumed it was something people did when they had time to waste. But now, with his mind as cluttered as his email inbox, he was willing to try anything. He slipped in his earbuds, pressed play, and closed his eyes. "Take a deep breath in," the voice instructed, smooth and steady. "Hold for a moment. Now, slowly exhale." James followed along, inhaling through his nose, feeling his lungs expand, then releasing the air slowly. His shoulders dropped slightly, the tension in his neck easing just a little. Maybe there was something to this after all. Picture yourself walking along a quiet path in the woods, the voice continued. The trees around you sway gently in the breeze. With every step, you feel lighter, as if the weight of your thoughts is beginning to lift. James did as he was told, imagining the forest path stretching ahead of him. He had spent so many years in a concrete jungle that the mental image of nature alone felt like a relief. The sound of the wind through the trees, the soft crunch of leaves beneath his feet, he could almost hear them as clearly as the voice in his headphones. The path led to a clearing, and at its center was a lake. The water was still, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. James walked closer, feeling an odd sense of familiarity. The meditation guide's voice returned. "This water reflects your mind. If it is unsettled, allow it to calm. If it is cloudy, let it clear." James knelt at the edge of the lake, staring at his reflection. His face looked different here. Less tired, less weighed down. He reached out, trailing his fingers through the water, watching as ripples distorted his image. His mind, much like the lake, had been disturbed for too long. Memories surfaced. Long nights at his desk, ignoring his body's exhaustion. The slow breakdown of a relationship he hadn't had the energy to save. The way his father had always told him that success meant working harder, pushing through, never slowing down. And for what? More stress? More loneliness? James exhaled, watching the water settle once more. He placed his palm against the cool surface, grounding himself in the moment. The voice in his ear was soft now. "You are not your stress, you are not your work. Let them drift away." He closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, simply existed. No expectations, no distractions, just breath and presence. When he opened his eyes, the night had deepened. Stars reflected on the lake surface, tiny beacons of light in the darkness. James stood, stretching, and removed his earbuds. The real world surrounded him again. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the whisper of the wind through the trees. And yet, something was different. He felt lighter. Tomorrow he would return to the meditation. Not because he had to, but because, for the first time in a long while, he wanted to.